You've talked a lot about your accomplishments as the program director. Have we left anything out?
Well, I think this may have been when I was GM, so I'm just looking. Yeah, I think it gets later even when I was the manager, I kept a hand in the programming. So
Yeah.
um, I mean, I that was kind of something I never really gave up. I was mainly on the kind of special things that I cared about.
You became the manager, but becoming the manager was probably stressful in the early going.
Well, the first board meeting was the number one topic was whether or not we should declare bankruptcy. So, which had not come up before.
Well, most people get 6 months of a honeymoon. You didn't.
No, no, but I'd been kind of the interim for a while, and frankly, the previous overall management had, not been particularly good. So I probably should have expected it. Maybe that was a little bit harsher than I thought it would be, but it was, it was a challenge of KBDI that I always had to kind of wrestle with is great ideals of what we wanted to do, and then just the limitations of not having funding. I mean, we didn't have institutional funding, state funding, university funding. We didn't have major donors, in that same way, major grants. So it really was a grassroots effort. And so, how do you kind of be idealistic, which I was idealistic, and how do you kind of fulfill that mission of kind of alternative television, what became for us increasingly First Amendment television, of kind of
Mhm.
showing a lot of different voices and really kind of taking on tough topics. I mean, how do you do that? And how do you do the business I mean, there's a reason why a lot, even a public television is kind of, I mean, I don't want to say dull, but it's kind of non-threatening, put it that way, is, you're hampered some by your funding sources. We're hampered by federal government funding, and on one hand, we wouldn't exist without it, or the institutional funding with its own expectations. So how do you be really independent, and how do you kind of have a healthy financial structure?
So there had been a series of managers, John Schwartz, Jeremy, Tony Esposito from PBS had come out and was the manager for a period of time.
I think he was in the distribution. I don't know that. I think it was the allure of somebody at PBS must know what they're doing. I was not involved in that hiring.
But you pulled it out. Um, the conversation at your first board meeting about should we declare bankruptcy, but you pulled it out of that. How did you do it? Because that's quite an accomplishment in itself.
Uh, well, I think one is I do have a combination of sort of idealism and pragmatism. So I mean, I think we basically had to say, what do we need, and what don't we need, and we had just had to pay attention. I think having a good business manager, somebody who could be honest with me about where we were on things. I think just getting a discipline. I mean, it was never easy. It wasn't like we suddenly were out of trouble. I mean, we had different cycles over. I know certainly the first 5 years or so, and and then I think the pledging. There were different experiments we did that worked, and I think specifically this the notion of the First Amendment, and remember, KRMA at that time had just come out of the school board. KRMA was very conservative, and so they were a very good way. It was good for us to have them in some way, but so we were totally not that. And we got a lot of good press for being kind of willing to kind of show things and to question things. Um, and we did that. And the one example, and I'm trying to remember what year it was 91, but a little bit later on. But um,
Mhm.
this was one of those pivotal moments where a program that came out of PBS, Tongues Untied, I think it was part of POV. I think
Mhm.
Jennifer Lawson, for credit, was probably the one at PBS behind that. It's not a program you would ever see today, I don't think, out of PBS. I don't mean that critically, just saying I don't think it would arise to that. Um, but a very graphic program, very I mean, one a really well done program, but about the Black experience, about the gay Black experience. It has, kind of graphic poetry, language, and kind of in your face language.
Brother to brother, 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 brother to brother. Brother to brother, 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 brother to brother.
Silence is my shield.
It crushes.
Silence is my cloak.
It smothers.
Silence is my sword.
It cuts both ways.
Most public stations, if they aired it at like 3 in the morning. I think Seattle had it at 3 in the morning, but a lot of stations
Right.
just. And we not just aired it, but we pledged. The first pledge break that we did in that program, where we had no idea what was going to happen. I mean, it was, KRMA didn't want anything to do with the program. It wasn't as open an environment as I think it is today. And that was a pretty out there program. And the experience of just starting to talk and not knowing whether we were going to get death threats or what, and like going from I felt like 30 minutes, just the phones ringing constantly, and one of the best pledge nights in our history.
Probably I was directing. It was pretty exciting that it was so busy, and it was, you had a lot of people that were calling it. I kind of remember that people were calling and, saying horrible things also, not only wonderful things, but
Yeah.
pretty controversial at the time. And it was, I really felt really proud to work at the station during those times.
One of those moments in time where you're doing what you want to do and you have the support to do it. So it kind of was one of those pivotal definitional moments for KBDI.
Well, you ran it at prime time. You pledged it. Things like Teletoons, Tongues Untied, the other things you did, in a way, were cutting new ground for society as we know it today.
Yes, you could look back on some had more notoriety. Tongues Untied had a lot of notoriety. Others, a lot of the theme nights we did were really questioning, environmental, homelessness, things like that.
I feel the best about feeling the future. When we got like how much money? $600,000 for that. I co-produced it with Diane, and then I did the one show on agriculture. And it was really a great experience traveling around the country, interviewing farmers and people involved in agribusiness. And it's a great experience. And it got a Corporation for Public Broadcasting award.
There could be an energy crisis at any moment, and it's beyond our control.
There still are people in the country who choose between heating and eating.
Here in the U.S., we are literally burning our resources.
I don't think we spend enough time asking what kind of society we really want.
God's really blessed this country. We are the most efficient producing country in the world.
American agriculture is self-destructive because it is self-deceptive.
The difference between a farmer and a pigeon today is that a pigeon can still make a deposit on a John Deere.
If we don't take and change our farming styles, we're going to be killing our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren.
In the price of food, we don't see the true human cost, the energy cost, the topsoil that is being lost. In other words, the price is deceiving us.
Agriculture is going to have to change, and it's going to use less energy.
There's something simple and elemental about planting a tiny seed and then nurturing it into a mature plant, then savoring the fruits of its harvest. But the way we grow food in America today is anything but simple. Tonight, we're going to see how American agriculture, like all aspects of modern society, has been transformed radically by technology.
I don't know if you ever heard of Paul Bortz. Paul Bortz is I think he's still around, but a highly regarded media consultant analyst, especially in the commercial world. But he was on our board for a number of years. And I just remember him telling me one time, I said, Ted, if you're ahead of your time, you're wrong. I don't know, he was coming from this ultra pragmatic, really good guy, but just very sharp guy, and ultra pragmatic world of what, ratings, numbers, and all of that, which was not quite how KBDI operated.
Did you pay attention to ratings? Because Pacifica and even a lot of the mainstream public radio stations for a long time were ratings averse.
Yes. Oh my God. We I forget, when did that come in where we would get overnights in the Denver market. And every morning I would look at those ratings, or Nick would, and share them.
Really?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it mattered. I paid attention to ratings. I paid attention to pledge. I mean, I had to pay attention to everything as the manager. And it was really interesting. There's something, we talked about this before, but is what did it take to kind of break through on numbers? So we would have, what today would be considered great ratings, because today everybody's audiences on broadcast is plummeted. But back then we were always, maybe half of KMA, even if we ran the same program, whatever. It was, we just, and I experimented. I remember getting one film series from a national distributor. I used to meet with these guys when they came to Denver, because they would see everything they could sell to all the commercial folks, and then I would meet with them, see what was left in the dustbin there. But I got this one film series of all major films from a few years ago, and the one I remember was Platoon. You remember Platoon? Oliver Stone and won Academy Award for Best Picture.
Yes.
All these stars in it, Johnny Depp and all these people, and I put it in. It was in obviously prime time, and it got, for us, good. It got like a 3.5 or something, which was. But if that had been airing on the NBC affiliate, it would have gotten like a 10 or something. So there was a sort of built-in limitation, I think, to being a second public television station, that there were people that just either were not aware of it. We didn't have much of a marketing. I mean, we had some, but not much. And it just didn't fit in there. It wasn't in their habitual viewing. So there was a limit, I guess, for what, I think our strength was in finding niche audiences. So we built a very strong, LGBTQ audience. regular weekly programs. Um, and it was an audience that we intentionally cultivated, a really kind of smart, a good public television audience, frankly, but not one that had been intentionally cultivated in the way that we did. Um, but that's different than an audience that would jump up in the ratings. So I think that was kind of the challenge, is finding those niches that would work. And sometimes controversy, like we ran, there's a Noam Chomsky documentary we ran, things like that. And a lot of those kinds of programs that were speaking to a specific audience that would respond and would be very supportive.
On the one hand, you ran Noam Chomsky, yet, and this may not be exactly the same time period, but I think it's a good comparison. You ran Rush Limbaugh.
Yes, we did run Rush Limbaugh, and that was, we were the only public station in the country, and I don't remember what year that was, but that was probably in the 90s. It was a program that Rush's TV show was not doing that well, I guess, and the Denver station, commercial station, had dropped it. And this was something where my pledge manager came into me and said, "What if we were to pick up that program?" And I mean, at first it just sounded totally bizarre. I mean, Rush Limbaugh was, in my mind, a kind of forerunner of some of the politics today, but kind of a totally out there. But on the other hand, it was an audience that we we were kind of pigeonholed somewhat as a liberal, kind of lefty, alternative audience, and yet we talked about the First Amendment and being open. So it was kind of a challenge to think about it that way. So both pragmatically, could we reach an audience, and also just philosophically saying, it's not like Russia's going to convert our audience. Matter of fact, one of the programs, I think, was Thursday night, led into a gay lesbian program. So it was one of the more interesting segues when we did a pledge break. But it so it was a big gamble, and I think we lost a number of Boulder people in that. Boulder is very, very liberal, and not in a bad sense, but so there were people who were very offended by it, but there were people, actually very, really well spoken, who would like comment and very enthusiastic about us being willing to do that. And it was only, I think it only ran with us for about 6 months or so. I can't remember the exact time frame, but it did cause a stir.
The First Amendment television positioning that you had, it seems like the logical thing to do.
Yeah, it is. I think it's the whole idea of the First Amendment is something I've thought about a lot more lately, as it's kind of things have gotten taken to extremes. And I think maybe what I miss, remember when there used to be the fairness doctrine in
Yes.
and I'd have to go back and read the actual wording, but essentially there was an obligation by a broadcaster. It wasn't that you couldn't run something, but that there be some kind of balance. So, I mean, there was absolutely no doubt with KBDI that, Rush Limbaugh did not control our airwaves. It would go at, I think, 11 o'clock at night or something, 10:30, 11, and, very strong opinions. And I also actually worked with a conservative think tank in Denver, the Independence Institute, to run a weekly show of theirs that aired on afternoons on the weekend. It included libertarian views, and was not a bad show. I mean, it's not a show I particularly agreed with, but it wasn't a bad show. And then we started. I was executive producer on a local show that's actually still on the air today, Colorado Inside Out. We started, with the intention of having a talking head show that wasn't just a bland, like a lot of those shows that you see that are kind of intentionally non-controversial. So we went out looking for people that were smart but had strong opinions. kind of put them together. So we had the editor of the alternative weekly Westward magazine that is still on the air, actually. Um, or still, she's still the editor. The program's still on the air. And we had folks from the Denver Post, the Rocky Mountain News, and other places, but they were just really good, smart people.
And all of that led to a First Amendment award, didn't it?
Yes, it did. It was the ACLU award. I was the face of all this. I mean, I was,
Yeah.
and so I would get the criticism or the praise off, critics like the Rocky Mountain News, Dusty Saunders, or Clark Seacrest, Denver Post. They wrote articles. They did. There are a number of. Usually, I was the point person for that. So yes, that was I think the ACLU award and the other what's mentioned. They kind of linked together. The Broadcast Citizen Award from the Colorado Broadcasters Association. So I became an establishment guy.
Yeah, you did. And not only were you an establishment guy in programming and within KBDI, but you were involved on a national level in a way that perhaps some other stations that were of an alternative nature, their general managers weren't involved. So you became involved on a national level kind of from the beginning.
Yeah, I was. I mentioned the PBS one, which was probably one of the more important because it actually changed or created a policy that worked, at least worked for the smaller stations in those markets. But I also was fairly early on invited to be part of some of the CPB ones, and I think back then it was Fred DeMarco, Doug Weiss, Connie Foster. I'm not sure why. I think initially because overlap was a big kind of a contentious issue. So when they did reviews or whatever, that they wanted to have a token, somebody from that. And Pagliarini was another who was on a lot of these, and Byron at some point was on some of them. So I was got. I think it worked both ways. I mean, I think it was good for the system because I also was pretty outspoken at national meetings. Probably a pain in the ass for some people, but I was very adamant about the rights of being a smaller station in the multi-station market, and that should be appreciated, that the differences should be appreciated, that it was actually a strength for public broadcasting. And I believe that if that other station is not just a pale imitation of the larger station. I don't know that that's in fact the case in many situations. But that was a case that I made that we should be supporting everybody, and it shouldn't be as competitive. But it got into other issues as well. So some of my evolution or socialization. I think another name I should mention because I think he was the first guy who brought me in from the cold, if you will. That was Joe Zespa at Pacific Mountain Network, which was based in Denver. And I had looked at, in the early days of KBDI, we just looked at everybody else in public media as basically kind of conservative, and that we didn't fit in. We were like the wild child. And we didn't like them, they didn't like us, so we didn't care about them. Maybe would be the right way. But Joe kind of made a point of coming up at one point, and just he came on our pledge drives, and he was, I don't know if you ever met him, but just an incredibly friendly guy and smart guy, and he became a friend. But he got me into joining Pacific Mountain Network, which was kind of eventually got wound down. I was the chair at the time, but it started a socialization. I feel like I was like a wild child that gradually got socialized, and maybe that kind of compromised me in some way. But I got to understand some of the broader issues affecting the industry through the CPB discussions and being involved in the different affinity groups and all of this. And so it probably made me, I'm not quite sure, but it was part of my evolution.
Your station, Nancy Dobbs' station, were you and others, were you accepted by the bigger, more established public television stations?
There was this one grand meeting, and I can't remember which year it was, with the big stations and the smaller stations in those markets. And it was all around this concept of, can we come together and find a vision that is inclusive? Is there a broader vision? Should we have multiple program schedules? Should we have a different program strand for these second or third stations? And, it was, there were some expectations that something could actually come out of this. But it was pretty clear in the meeting that the larger stations really didn't have any interest. And I remember Bill Baker having a conversation with him, and he basically said, I don't want you to have any different program. I would prefer you ran Nature at the same time I ran Nature than that you have another program on the air. And I didn't totally get the logic, but I guess, in some way I understand the general sensibility about the priority should be on a strong national service. It should not be on kind of trying to create another service that's going to compete with that strong service. And then I think the other thing, and this is my maybe criticism of my colleagues on the multi-station, on the smaller station side, so I think most of them just wanted to be just like the bigger ones. I mean, they didn't have an alternative vision particularly. And they just wanted to be able to run the high visibility shows and get, more pledge money and more underwriting, but they didn't have a sense of anything like First Amendment or any issue like that. It wasn't inspired by an alternative vision. May have been more realistic than our vision, but it wasn't inspired by that. So I didn't really fit into that group. If I looked at like WLIW or Utah, Provo, or San Jose, they did not, we talked a lot about how to get those guys, but it wasn't really common ground.